My name is Christopher Paquette. I'm the Chief Digital Transformation Officer at Allstate Insurance. So I think deeply about AI quite often, kind of my day job. But in preparing for this, I was thinking I could talk about the latest computer vision models and the efficacy and effectiveness on claim prediction and severity. And then I was like, oh, no, I don't want to do that. I want to keep it a little bit lighthearted. And so I'm going to try to zig when many others have zagged. And so as you can see through the title here, I asked myself two questions. One is like, well, how can I keep it a little bit lighthearted? And so I decided to do AI through the eyes of an 11-year-old, my 11-year-old, Nora. And so I asked her, Nora, can I ask you some questions about AI and like what it means to you and what maybe this room full of super smart adults can take from it? And she said, she's a teenager, 11-year-old, she said, and so my second question I asked myself was, how do I make it a little bit more interesting? And so we're going to do AI through the eyes of an 11-year-old, having just seen The Matrix for the first time. So we went and we watched the movie together. So we're going to keep it lighthearted. And I said, Nora, we're going to watch the movie. I want some reactions just from your day-to-day life, your Snapchat streak and your GarageBand creations and your online drawing and all the stuff that you do. But also think about this dystopian society in The Matrix. Has everyone seen The Matrix? If you haven't, I'm totally going to spoil it. So heads up, it'll be more interesting if you have, at least you can get it. So we're going to do this in two parts. First is just like a temperature check that I did with her of like, how do you feel about AI in the world and also in The Matrix? And then the second are a series of questions with maybe some insights and interesting implications maybe for us. So we'll see. Here we go. So first of all, initial reactions. I was actually quite proud of her. She had a pretty measured response. It wasn't, you probably can't read this too well, not disbelief or fear. There was no like, oh my God, the world's going to end. But also maybe a little bit surprisingly, given the user of technology and AI that she is, there also was an outright excitement or optimism. It was more of a measured pessimism that you had. And these are some pretty close quotes. This could actually happen in the next decades, thinking of like, well, living in machines, or it'll be AR, VR, and chips and brains. AI have benefits now, clearly, but it won't be in the end. And Dad, this is already happening. We're already being influenced. The machine is already running. Even if it's not like sentient or autonomous, it's already out there. So this was her approach and kind of the general temperature of the talk that we had. And I said, okay, well, with that, like, let's take some insights from the movie and maybe some implications for us. So that's what we did. I asked her 4 questions. Well, more than that. Four of the questions that I asked got interesting responses. I'll try that instead. So the first one is, how do we maintain our sense of self? And we heard Catherine up here actually before talk about personalization, influence machine that's out there working. And I'm thinking contextualization and recommendations in insurance and leading someone down the path and this echo chamber that we can create in the upcoming election season and all that stuff, right? And so the question for Nora was, how do we maintain our sense of self? And she had a pretty kind of down the middle of the road response. She said, in an increasingly connected and data-driven world, it is hard to be exposed to new truths unintentionally. So this is a paraphrase. She doesn't use things like unintentionally and whatnot. She's an 11-year-old. But what she said rings true, right? And we all know this. And so I said, okay, well, like, what's the insight? What's the implication for you and then eventually for us? And she said, well, really, that it's about curiosity. How do you overcome this lack of ability to learn new things? Well, it's being curious. So Dad, think of Neo, so back now to the movie, think of Neo in The Matrix where he follows a white rabbit, or there's that scene where he like, blue pill, red pill, and he takes the red pill because he wants to know more and he's going to dive in. And so I said, okay, well, what do you do with that? And she said, well, like when I'm talking to my friends, I might do an additional research, or if I hear something online, I check 3 sources, or I'm trying to ask the question why, which I think is really healthy. I was actually quite proud of her. So curiosity is one implication. Another interesting question I asked her is, does it matter if things are real? And there's a scene in the movie where one of the bad guys who betrays the team of humans is sitting with one of the programs in The Matrix, and he's eating a steak and drinking wine, and he's like, is this real? I don't really care. Ignorance is bliss because this steak is delicious. Is kind of what happens in the scene. And I expected her to have a similar reaction of, well, perception's reality, and eventually I think these two things converge, and maybe it doesn't really matter if things are real. Instead, she said something to me pretty interesting. She said, the more we have, the less important it is for those things to be real. The more we have, the less important it is for those things to be real. I was like, okay, well, what does that mean? She's like, well, it's all about being distracted. And the more and more stuff that's out there, the more noise there is and the less signal, the more stuff, the more things. Like, it's kind of okay because you lose the sense of what really matters in life. And I said, well, what matters in life? She thought, and she said, authenticity. She said, think of Trinity, Dad. Trinity was this character that kind of led the group of followers for Neo, and she was steadfastly devoted to Neo, and she believed in what was real, and she believed in making this thing happen. And she said, like, you have to embrace what's authentic, and that's what I tried to do as well. So, interesting point number 2, maybe. The third question is, what does morality mean in the Matrix, or our pre-Matrix world? And I had some follow-up questions like, well, is it wrong to kill someone in the Matrix? And she's like, yes, of course. It's like, well, is it wrong to, run a red light in a driving video game that you play now? And she's like, yeah, probably not. I was like, yeah, but there's somewhere in the middle where it crosses over, right? How do we know what's okay and what's not? What's that boundary for morality? And she had this interesting perspective. She said, well, it's really hard to blame a person directly if it's the AI that was the influence behind doing something wrong. I said, okay, well, what do we do with that? Like, how do you know? Are we all just going to like cede responsibility to AI and say like, okay, well, blame it on this? She said, no, Dad, you have to have hope. Hope like Morpheus did. Hope in the goodness of human beings, and hope in ourselves, and an expectation, even more than hope, an expectation that people do the right thing. And so this was her third message to me, maybe to us. So curiosity, authenticity, and hope. And then the fourth question I asked is, how far is too far in AGI? Obviously, we don't want to get to the point where we're all living in a matrix simulation with machines ruling the world, of course. But how far is too far? And her response, I thought, was pretty cool. She said, well, boundaries should be driven by, or at least influenced by, the, quote, humanness of a machine or AI. I said, well, what does humanness mean? We talked about that for a while, and eventually we arrived at, well, Dad, think about this character, Agent Smith, the lead agent who's like, seems more human than machine. Why? Because he has emotions. He hates the Matrix. He hates the world. He's making choices that are confusing the other programs. And that's where we arrived on, well, hey, maybe it's choice. Maybe it's choice that is really that turning point. And that us as consumers, and she as an 11-year-old, needs to maintain that choice. She needs to choose actively, intentionally, thoughtfully, what she wants to do with AI and the actions that she's going to take as a result of it. So here we are. A lighthearted talk. Our AI mandate from an 11-year-old has nothing to do with auto insurance or premiums or car crashes or computer vision, but maybe we can take that. We're just supposed to be good humans. Curiosity, authenticity, hope, and choice. And not just in how we consume AI, but also in how we create AI and leave space for those 11-year-olds that are out there to embrace these 4 things. Thank you.
Great.